In this episode, I am going to be reviewing The Godfather from 1972. This is the 50th anniversary of this classic film. It was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. He also co-adapted the screenplay with Mario Puzo, who wrote the novel in which the film is based on. It stars wonderful, amazing, incredible cast: Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, Talia Shire, Diane, Keaton, Robert Duvall, John Cazale, and James Caan. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a video podcast where I explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film. Wow, 50 years The Godfather came out and it still feels so fresh, so modern, and is catching up to audiences of all ages. I remember first seeing this when I believe I was about 14. I actually saw the trilogy backwards. I remember at some point in the 90s, we were on a vacation somewhere with my family and part 3 was on TV, and I remember enjoying it. We all watched it together. I can't remember if we watched all of it or just parts of it. And then in the late 90s, my brother's friend brought over the box set back in the VHS box set back then, and we were watching part 2. And I remember my mother coming and turning it off because she didn't like the fact that I was watching such a violent film when I was only 11 in 1998. And then a few years later, I saw part 1 and I was just, blown away. Occasionally I'd see my father watching it on TV, even, in the late 90s or maybe the year 2000, and being attracted to it, thinking it looked like an interesting film, something grabbed my attention about it. And, I just saw the entire trilogy, just 1, 2, 3, when I was 14, and really, really blown away. The first one is a film that has a thick plot, strong characters. To me, the film is really about the story of America, corruption, capitalism, profit. Doesn't matter who we have to kill to get it. And the threat of family, of this family being torn apart because of the choices they made in order to survive. And they became criminals, and how that is affecting all the sons. It's affecting the daughter, Connie, played by Talia Shire. And it destroys the family and ultimately corrupts the soul of the young Michael, played by Al Pacino, who takes the reins of the head of the family, even though he didn't really want to. And he becomes worse than his father in a lot of ways. And it's interesting because when you see Michael off the top, he's goes to the wedding, Connie's wedding, and he's a complete outsider. He's sitting alone with Kay, again, a non-Italian woman. She's just down to the wardrobe, the very colorful wardrobe she wears, as opposed to the black and white, the suits of everybody else. And he went to the war. Of course, we find out later in part 2 that was something that his father did not want. There was actually a deleted scene which you could see if anyone has any of the box sets. I know that these have been released in many different forms, but the Godfather box set that I have from the early 2000s, the DVD, there's some really good deleted scenes, and there's one where they go to the hospital to visit Genko. Genko is a character that you saw in part 2 with the young Vito Corleone. And there was another scene in this one that was deleted. He was actually Vito Corleone's partner in the olive oil business, and he's dying in the hospital. So as they go to see him, there's a really good scene between Brando and Pacino where he sort of is not very impressed with his medals, the things that he won, that he got as a result of being a war hero. So, when James Caan as Sonny pokes fun at it a little bit, but that was actually more explained in part 2. But he's a complete outsider. Of course, he wanted nothing to do with the family business. He, as he tells Kay, "This is my family, Kay, it's not me." He tells her what happened with Johnny Fontaine, the singer that we see, which is loosely based on Frank Sinatra. Of course, his career was going really, really well. And he couldn't get out of his contract as he was getting bigger. The band leader said, "You can't get out of your contract." And Vito made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And he showed up and said, "Either your brains or your signature are going to be on the contract," to let him out of his contract, so he can go pursue the career that was blooming. And he says to Kay, it's my family, Kay, and it's not me. We, of course, see later on it is him to an extent, but he becomes worse than his father. He becomes colder, more violent. Not that he was directly violent, but Vito was a man who was only violent if he absolutely had to be violent. Violent was a last resort. Even when his son later on, Sonny, is killed, he knows that there's this war going on between the families, and he says, let's stop this war now, call the heads of the 5 families and let's end it. And the first line in that meeting is, how did things ever get so violent? Whereas later on, you see Michael is settling old vendettas, things that Vito already settled. And now the new conflicts with Bazzini, who was the head of one of the other of the 5 families. And he's wipes out his entire competition. And of course, he waited till his father died to do this. Now, it's not so clear whether that was intentional or not. You don't really know. And I'm going to get to sort of how they handled some of the things that were vague in the film, intentionally vague. And I think that's why you go and have a lot of repeat viewings in this film, because even though it is a heavy plot, the plot is not so spelled out that you really do have to lean into it. But it's a wonderful plot and also has really, really wonderful characters. And something that I think is less talked about is the relationship between Michael and Kay, played by Diane Keaton. Because when you see him with Kay early in the film, he's very loving towards her. He's very warm. He seems like he's completely in love with her when they go to the movies, when they're going shopping out for Christmas. And all of a sudden, it's when his father died, he gets cold. You see afterwards when she calls to talk to him on the phone, she says, I love you, and he can't even say it back. They have a meal together. He hardly says anything. He says he doesn't know when he's going to see her again now. You got to ask yourself, why? So is that just because of the nature of the fact that his father was shot and he's in such distress that he's sort of is not so much that he's losing feelings for her, or is it just because he can't handle what's happening? Possibly. My interpretation, though, is that he actually really wanted his father's approval. He was a man who wanted acceptance by his family. And when he finally saw that this was probably his last chance from his father getting shot, you see when he visits him in the hospital and he says, I'm with you, Pop, I'm with you. And I think he felt, God, if I don't know whether Michael was conscious of that or not, but he says, I have to do this now. I have to get with my family. Now, you can also say on the flip side that he was perhaps the only person who could save the family, because there's an all-out war breaking out. Sollozzo brings in this drug business. He wants Vito's help. Vito says no, because he doesn't want to get involved with drugs. And so he gets everybody to basically, the other families, to go along with killing Vito and basically making a deal with Vito's son, Sonny, and with Tom Hagen. And again, that's where the capitalism comes in, because these guys who are already, they look like they're doing quite well to me, but it's like, but this is going to make them even more money. And of course, and it's totally illegal. And everything they're doing is illegal, but this is just, now we're going even further. Now we're getting into narcotics, we're getting into heroin, and they'll wipe you out. You get in their way of their money, they'll wipe you out. And so you could say that perhaps Pacino as Michael felt he had no option, felt that Sonny was too temperamental. Fredo didn't have the brains for it. Of course, this is a patriarchal family, so they're not going to have Connie, the daughter, be the head of the family. Tom was a lawyer. He was the consigliere. He wasn't a blood relative, and so he felt he had to. Now, I think I think that is truth to that. I think it's complicated as to why Michael does these things, but he certainly is not happy. He certainly is a man who had other ambitions. We don't really know what the nature of those ambitions are. We see as he gets back from Sicily, he says to Kay, and as that he loves her, he wants to be with her, and she says, I thought you weren't going to ever become a man like your father. You wanted to do other things, and he just doesn't really give her a good answer. But I think partly didn't want to do it. And I think that's why he becomes so ruthless. Clearly, it was in him. Clearly, I don't think you could do those things unless it's somewhat in you. And obviously, he grew up in an environment where he was witnessing violence and seeing things. So it's fascinating. But why he goes cold on Kay, I think it's really because she was not Italian. She was an outsider. I'm an outsider. I don't want to be reminded of my own rebellion and with someone who's not Italian, who's different than my family, you know. And I think there's something to that. You know, it's really interesting, this film, because you have to lean into it. And I think that's why a lot of people go back with repeat viewings, because it's full of behavior, full of contradictions, and complex relationships, and a plot that is not so spelled out, even though the gist of it is. But I'll get to that in a minute. I also want to discuss, of course, the incredible cinematography by Gordon Willis. It's so dark, you could almost make this into a black and white film. I mean, the use of shadows, it looks like film noir. The use of shadows, if you look at the environment that they're in, everything is brown and black down to the wardrobe. And apparently he even used a chocolate filter on the lights to give it that brown tinge that it has. By contrast, when you see him in Sicily, which is a brighter time for Michael, or even at the wedding, Connie's wedding, everything is bright. When they go to Hollywood also to see Waltz, that is also brighter. Of course, they're in sunny LA. So there was these, and Gordon Willis said, well, you can't have the whole film dark. We have to have some contrast. And I like what he said. It's like filming is not getting the reality. It's not the reality of something. It's an image of the reality. It's the feeling of the reality. And I really like that. I mean, he was an incredible cinematographer. And this shooting style you can also see in Clute with Jane Fonda, which is also very, very dark. But it's wow, it's just breathtaking. And it really changed cinematography in a lot of ways, because you saw people being very bold with those kind of choices. I mean, can you imagine going to Paramount in the rushes and seeing a film that dark in the early 70s? And they were not happy with that. They were like, it's too dark. Why? I can barely see their faces at times. And thank God you had a guy like Coppola who stuck to his guns, and they really agreed with that vision. And obviously it's a dark film. What's happening with these men live dark lives. So I felt that it had the feelings of what was happening to these people internally. And it was expressed so beautifully in the cinematography. Another note, of course, is the wonderful editor. I'm sure many of you have read this book, Conversations and the Art of Editing Film. For anyone listening to this on the audio version of the podcast, I'm currently holding up the book by Walter Murch that he wrote on editing. And he talks about, he edited The Godfather, The Conversation, later with Coppola, a lot of really, really big films. And he talks about use of sound as well in this film. And if you're going to use sound effects, obviously, I mean, some sound effects are just, if there's a punch, you're going to have to hear the punch. It's necessary to believe the story, to believe the action. But sometimes it is to add the emotion, and it's to heighten the emotion. Like, for example, when Michael is about to kill Sollozzo in the restaurant, he goes to the bathroom to find the gun that they hid there for him. You start to hear this train screeching, and the stress of Michael, what he's feeling internally, the anxiety that he has to go kill these men, it heightens it, it elevates it. And even as he goes back and sits there, and he sits there for about maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and you hear it again, and then it goes dead silent as he gets up and shoots them both in the head, Sollozzo and Sterling Hayden as the police chief. So there's a lot of really great sounds in this film. Those are the ones that really pop out to me, that are really, really wonderful, by the great Walter Murch, who was a frequent collaborator of Francis Ford Coppola. Another element was just talking about Kay later on, as Michael's in Sicily for a long time. There's this great scene where she goes back to see if she can get in touch with him, and she sees Tom Hagen there, and she's just in this orange dress, and everyone else gray, black, brown. You don't see any other colors, and I thought it was wonderful from the costume designer, and it just brought out again, how much of an outsider she was. She just stuck out like a sore thumb. One thing about, as I said, there's, you have to lean into this because you get the gist of why the war breaks out and what they do about it, how they hit back on Sollozzo. I can be here all day to go over it, but I think you can really go down a rabbit hole with this film. Because, for example, on my recent viewing, and I've seen this film a million times, on my recent viewing, the character of Bazzini, played by Richard Conte, he was one of the heads of the five families. But if you notice, you don't see those people, those guys' points of views outside of the meeting with Vito or at the wedding. You see them earlier. You see very little of these guys, so you don't know really what they're thinking. But you also see that Vito and Michael always know what they're thinking. Now, that was something that was a little clearer in the second one, when Michael has that line, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. These guys were so street smart that they knew that there was a constant threat from the other heads of the five families, the other gang, so to speak. But if they know what they think, what those people are thinking, they can always be one step ahead of them. And you definitely see that in this film, when he knows there's that, of course, the beautiful garden scene towards the end between Michael and his father, Vito, when Vito says, I didn't want this for you. You could have been a senator. You could have been something else, something better, not a criminal. But he tells him right off the bat, this is what's going to happen. Bazzini's going to come after you. You don't know how he knows that, but you just accept it. And again, it's because they know how these people are thinking. They start to move into Las Vegas at this point. And you also see that scene when Michael goes to Vegas and he tries to buy out from the casino owner, and the guy gets mad and says, oh, you know what? I talked to Bazzini. I can make a better deal with him. So they obviously knew that Bazzini, that they were trying to cut in on this casino thing. So again, but no one, it's not so spelled out. Not everything is so spelled out. You have to really listen to just these lines, these brief lines but you certainly get the gist of it. But I really went down a rabbit hole with Bazzini this time because I was thinking, what was he up to? He obviously knew about the casino. He wanted that. You also hear Clemenza and Tessio, they start to get angry at Michael because they're saying, oh, Bazzini's he's taken over our territories and they're letting him. Now, why did they let him? Again, it's not really explained. Now, again, I can be here all day to go over this stuff, go down a real rabbit hole, but I think essentially it doesn't truly matter because really what the film matters is the people and the gist of what they're doing. And you certainly get enough. Now, if you're really interested, you can really be thinking about the motivations from Bazzini and why he was going after Michael at the end. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because Michael just decides, you know what, I'm going to wipe everyone out. So I don't have to, and it wasn't just because he was concerned that everyone was going to go after it. Again, as I said, it was about all those old beefs. It was about killing Sonny. It was about shooting the father. It was about going with Sollozzo. It was about everything. And of course, killing his own brother-in-law. Now, what's also interesting is he kills his brother-in-law on the day, on the day of the baptism of Carlo and Connie's baby. And of course, the great irony is during the baptism, they're cutting to the murders happening at the same time while Michael's saying, I renounce Satan, and they're cutting back and forth. I mean, it was so creepy to me that he knows he's lying. I mean, committing just total sin right then and there as he's taking holy sacrament and basically taking the host and talking to a priest while he knows exactly what is going on outside of this. I mean, he really, he does not renounce Satan. He basically becomes him in a lot of ways. And as Coppola said, it's about a man whose soul is destroyed, and he sort of sells his soul to save the family. Now, of course, it is empathetic, because you understand why he's doing it, but that doesn't mean that that you can excuse it. And of course, who can forget the score, the soundtrack of this film by the great Nino Rota, who did so many Fellini films, so many Visconti films. Actually, when you go back and watch Rocco and his brothers, La Strada, The Leopard. You see such an influence on the story of those films, on The Godfather as well. Breathtaking score, probably one of the best soundtrack scores in cinematic history. What else can I say? It's stunning. It's incredible. Another note on the cinematography, and this is something Coppola said, was that it looks like a Da Vinci painting. You know, it looks like the Renaissance painting. I mean, it's looked like oil paintings. It looks absolutely remarkable. But it's not just a nice aesthetic. It adds to the emotion of the piece, which is the essential component and purpose of photography, or this kind of photography in film. There's also, so much trivia on this film. I mean, Barry Levinson is making a movie about the making of this film. I just heard the other day that there's a series coming out about the making of this film. Now, I can be here all day to talk about all the problems that Francis Ford Coppola had making this film, how many times he was almost fired, they didn't want Pacino, they didn't want a lot of the cast. Really, it's really interesting. If you can, again, get these DVD box set. I'm sure there's a Blu-ray box set as well. There's a documentaries, great interviews where the cast and crew talk about it, and they've been asked about it to death. I mean, even 5 years ago, I guess at the 45th anniversary, at the Tribeca Film Festival, they had a Q&A about the making of the Godfather trilogy. It's really, really interesting. But a couple of things I'll just mention that stand out to me the most was, if you look at Pacino when he goes and gets the gun. Now, they told him, okay, yeah, they hid the gun in the bathroom. That's where they planted it. You go out and you kill Sollozzo. So the shot was he just had to go to the bathroom, grab the gun, and leave. So they didn't put the gun there. And then if you see Pacino's, just for a few seconds, his hands are moving around and he's really looking for it. And you see a bit of like his body jolts from the panic. And even the audience, or myself anyways, you're like, oh crap, the gun's not there. And then they cut. And then because they cut back to Sollozzo, they were able to just take it from the moment he takes the gun out and continue it. But that was a surprise there for Pacino. I really, really like that. And that scene as well, they weren't happy with Pacino. They were seeing the dailies, a lot of the early Michael at the wedding, before the changes occur, before he starts to turn into the head of the family. And so Paramount thought he was flat and boring, and they were not happy casting him to begin with. So Francis intentionally did that scene earlier, because that's a scene when you really start to see Michael change, even the way he was looking at Sollozzo, just with absolute hatred. I mean, just like there's the look in his eye is terrifying, and he's scary in that scene, but also the anxiety he brought to have to kill those men, but also very self-assured, very confident, which is very part of the Michael we saw later, the coldness of Michael that we saw later. That's really, really fascinating. And of course, as I said, the performance in this film, these are masterclass performances. Brando, incredible. Of course, he refused the Oscar because of the way minorities and indigenous men and women were portrayed on film as a protest. And the irony was that he was booed at that time, even at the ceremony, whereas today, I'm sure something like that would be applauded. We even saw Joaquin Phoenix at the BAFTA Awards when he won for Joker talk about the fact that there wasn't a very diverse cast of nominations, and that he was really, really appalled by that. But things have changed. But at that time, Marlon was ahead of the game by doing something like that and defending minorities like that, which is pretty much the norm. But his performance, of course, is every time I see him as he looks at James Caan's body when he tells the Undertaker, I want you to do all your strengths so he looks good in the coffin, because of course they massacred him. And that extreme close-up, and you see him just whimper a bit, and he says, they massacred my boy. I mean, it's stunning acting. Pacino, of course, James Caan and Duvall were wonderful. I mean, Duvall was so straight and perfect as this calculating, really intelligent lawyer. Another note on this film is the fact that they did a lot visually in this film by telling the story without a lot of dialogue, which actually in part 2 was even much more so. But in this one, just looking at the Johnny Fontaine story, they go to Hollywood. He says to he says to Waltz, the head of the studio, you got to give Johnny Fontaine the lead in the film. You got to give Johnny Fontaine the lead of the film. He says no, because he hates Johnny Fontaine. He wants to ruin his career. He took off with a woman that Waltz was really, really, I don't know if he was in love with her, but really, really liked her, had a lot of faith in her, and she ran off with him. So he tells him to get out. And you see the way in which Tom Hanks doesn't even react. Thank you for a lovely evening. You know, he sort of nods, and, you know, my client is a man who wants to hear bad news immediately. Cut immediately to the horse's head in his bed as he wakes up, the famous scene, the dead horse's head starts to scream. And we don't hear anything about that for a couple of scenes. They go into the Salazzo, and then they deliver the flowers to Vito. And Vito says, what are the flowers for? It's like, oh, Johnny Fontaine sent it. He just started shooting that movie. So you know what happened. Now, no one explained anything. You don't see the scene of Vito. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to cut the horse that he loves. We're going to cut the head as a sign to tell him you're going to be next, as a threat. You don't see any of that, but the audience knows exactly what happened. And it was done visually beautifully. So I like that, really. But in part two, you see a lot more of that, which is really, really, you know, just cinematic storytelling. Jimmy Caan, of course, I mean, the temper, just an electric temper. He had some really wonderful scenes. Of course, the whole conflict with Carlo, that whole thing, you know, that even that scene where Carlo beats up Talia Shire. I mean, it was beautifully acted by Talia Shire as well. And it's really, actually, that was another bit of trivia, was that they didn't think that the film was violent enough, and they were almost going to send a violence director to the set. And Coppola was like, oh yeah, I'll show you a violent scene. And that scene he intentionally where he's whipping her and with the belt. I mean, it's ugly. It's ugly to see. But Talia Shire, Diane Keaton, of course, as I mentioned, just, you know, she's totally in love with Michael. And, you know, even at the end, even though he's abandoned her, she still goes back with him. But you see that, as she says, Michael, why now after all this time? I really love that scene in the street. I mean, I could talk about this film all day. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful film. I highly recommend, again, getting the box set of all three, checking out the special features. I'm sure the series, I hope that's going to be good, but, you know, go to the source. And if you want to read up on the making of this, it's fascinating. And with every viewing, you will see more about these people. Another thing that popped out to me was that first scene with Bonacera. You know, as he says, I believe in America. America gave me my fortune. But now he's starting to not believe in it, because he believed in the justice system. And because his daughter was beaten up, and the guys who beat her up got scot-free in court, and they smiled at him, as he says. And, you know, one line that people don't talk about a lot is that, you know, Vito says to him, why didn't you come to me first? In other words, yeah, you think that they're going to give you justice? I'll give you justice. So really, this is why this is the story of America in a lot of ways. Corruption, you know, Vito has all these connections with politicians, so they're clearly corrupt. He's corrupt. The justice system is corrupt. And so this fading, this sort of naive look of American dream, and if I work hard, sort of the Willy Loman and Death of a Salesman view of the world. As long as I work hard, I believe in America, and I can do anything here, and everything is going to be fair. And that's obviously not true. And Vito knows it's not true. And that was something I really picked up on, which is such a great scene. And it just lays the foundation for the rest of the film, because the whole thing is about these people, ruthless people who will kill, steal, and do anything for more and more and more profit. Of course, mixed in with this family, threat of the family, but things that a lot of people can relate to. We can all relate to wanting our parents to be proud of us, to want it to be included into the family, people loving each other. And I think we can see ourselves in the family, you know, mixed in with this really interesting crime story, which again, to me, is really the story of America. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. If you've seen The Godfather, which I'm sure you have, please comment below. Let me know what you think the essence of the story is. Tell me in the comment below. I would love to hear what you think. Thank you so much again. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of the podcast and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode can be found. There's only so many on the audio version. Go to youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. And I am also on Patreon. If you don't know what Patreon is an exclusive membership program where there is a lot of bonus content created by myself. Many content creators use it, musicians, all kinds of artists. It's a few bucks a month, and it really helps artists to earn an income while we create, free content on YouTube and other kinds of platforms. The Patreon account I have is similar to the YouTube channel. The difference is it is based on polls. I put out polls at the beginning of every single month, which you can vote on. So you will be very much included in the decision making as to what I do on Patreon every single month. So go to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner here, your top left. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release a new video or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.